Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for another video which will appear in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one, obviously, being the poetry discussion playlist, but number two being the Emily Dickinson playlist, a playlist specifically for Emily Dickinson poems. And we are here with one of Emily Dickinson's earlier poems, and there are two things to sort of keep an eye on here. When we are doing this, what we want to be looking at is subject matter. And this will become, I think, more apparent after the reading, after we read through the poem. But once we get into talking about it a little bit, it might be sort of stark, right? It'll be something that I think slaps you in the face. And so we're probably going to get into a little bit more biographical criticism with this one. So let's just get into it. A something in a summer's day as slow as a something in a summer's day as slow her flambeau burn away, which solemnizes me. A something in a summer's noon, a depth, an azure, a perfume, transcending ecstasy. And still within a summer's night, a something so transporting bright, I clap my hands to see, then veil my too inspecting face, lets such a subtle shimmering grace flutter too far for me. The wizard fingers never rest the purple brook within the breast, still chafes it narrow bed. Still rears the east her amber flag, guides still the sun along the crag, his caravan of red. So looking on the night, the morn, conclude the wonder game, and I meet coming through the dews another summer's day. So the two things to sort of pay attention to here, as far as I can really tell, are the season. We're talking about summer again. The summer seems to be something very, very special to Emily Dickinson. The summer being in the Northeast, more temperate than here in the Midwest. Still hot, but not like it is here. The middle Midwest, the southern Midwest maybe, depending on how you divide the country. Kansas City, Missouri, very hot in the summers. So there is that idea of exuberance, of vibrance here. And one of the things that you'll notice reading a lot of Emily Dickinson is, look, there's 1,775 poems. An inordinate amount of them begin with the words I or I'm. So we have someone who definitively when I say ego, I don't mean bravado. I mean ego as in a sense of self. The speaker through these poems has a definitive sense of self, even if the speaker here is searching for the self. The self is guaranteed existence, basically. I think, therefore I am. I poem, therefore I am. That is one of the seeming arguments from Emily Dickinson, but there is, you will find, I think, throughout the entirety of Emily Dickinson, a stunning lack of others. There is otherness. The poem I'm Nobody, Who Are You is a stark example of otherness, but it's not, well, I'm nobody, who are you? There is an other implied therein, but very seldom, compared to the explorations of nature, does Emily Dickinson really offer any insight on company, on popularity, on other people, on the human experience as far as what it means to be getting along to get along. That wasn't Emily Dickinson's bag, but Emily Dickinson was very concerned with exuberance. Using the word, I don't know how many times, exuberance, ecstasy. We have here transcending ecstasy, this idea of the summer being so very bright, so very important. This is a soul, a poet, a writer, a human being calling out for something different than what it is that that human being has. But that human being is not sure how to ask for it, possibly is not sure what it even is that she is wanting. They are. I mean, we don't know of the gender of many of the speakers here, right? We know Emily Dickinson, but we don't know if the speaker is necessarily Emily Dickinson. But if we're making some sort of biographical criticism, some sort of biographical critique, we can say from Emily Dickinson, these are poems from Emily Dickinson. The speaker in poetry is more often the poet than in fiction, the speaker being the writer. That's necessitated. Otherwise, it would be nonfiction, right? Poetry, interestingly, sort of dances that line, especially when you get to someone like Charles Bukowski. Are these fictionalized accounts from Chinaski, or are these just Charles Bukowski translating his life into words and then further through a typewriter onto a page? But with Emily Dickinson, we have, so if we have Charles Bukowski acting sort of autobiographical, with Emily Dickinson, what we have is not even necessarily a fiction layer to the autobiography. With Emily Dickinson, it sort of jumps above the fiction layer even and exists on, and I don't mean to put philosophy as above fiction, just simply stratusphering, but it exists. Emily Dickinson's speakers exist something closer to something that you would find maybe in Nietzsche, um, as opposed to a speaker from, say, Ernest Hemingway, from any of the speakers that you would read from a fiction writer. It seems more of that strained sort of fiction that we get often filtered through a philosopher. And one of the things that maybe if you've been around the channel long enough, you've heard me say, Hitler, right? He was an artist before he was a Hitler. And one of the things that people who have seen his paintings comment on, not real good at painting people. A lot of flowers, a lot of bridges, architecture, things like that. Not particularly adept at representing human beings. Now, I am not saying on any level that Emily Dickinson is a Hitler, but I think there is a mechanism somewhere in the brain that flips, and all of a sudden human beings are themselves an other. And that's obviously what allowed the atrocities of World War II. But I think that it's also what allows that same mechanism being flipped is what allows a poet like Emily Dickinson the leeway to write the poetry that she wrote. Because what we're not talking about is we're not talking about the idiosyncrasies of some schmuck she was dating. What we're talking about are the deep intuitions of a human being. What we are talking about are the deep seated drives of humanity, because there was no one else there to interpret from. What Emily Dickinson had to do was search within the self in order to produce, to draw out like a salve, this sort of language, these ideas in the absence of the fleshy stuffs around you to bounce them off of, have to really be ginned up into something else to compel someone to write them down in this fashion. I think that makes sense, right? Without someone there to listen and nod and give you the occasional your language has to be transformed into something that is undeniably individualistic, because there is not that soft, fleshy sounding board. And that is, again, I think, what we have here from Emily Dickinson. Look, that's all I have for this poetry discussion. If you enjoy what I do here, hitting that like button really does me a lot of good on the channel. It tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers, and I appreciate that. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel. Poetry every Mondays, also short stories. Currently going through a read-along for Dubliners by James Joyce. Also doing a read-along for No Longer Human. I promise I'm getting back to that. It's just taking me longer than I would like. So I hope to have you back for the next one.